afternoon, good evening students, I hope you're doing good. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're back with another lecture concerning civilization. As you can see, we are going to tackle a new chapter entitled The Roaring Twenties, which means we have finished with the First World War or the Great War. So in today's video we are going to see the American context of the Roaring Twenties between 1919 until 1929. Anyways, we will talk about a brief definition of the Roaring Twenties in order to make you or have you familiar with the topic. Then we are going to study this decade deeper or more specifically. Anyways, the points to discuss today is first the definition, of course. Then we are going to discuss the economic prosperity during the Roaring Twenties, Republicans, automobile, women, movies, jazz age, Prohibition and bootleggers, Nativism and racism, of course, lost generation, return to isolationism, and fundamentalism and Scope's trial, and to round off with Harlem Renaissance. Now, we'll start with the definition first, then we are going to study things specifically. First, the Roaring Twenties, also known under the name of the Aspirin Age, was a decade of a dramatic social and political change, and economical if you want. The most prominent change is the rise of a consumer-oriented economy and mass entertainment. So this definition is the overview of the Roaring Twenties. Everything that we are going to discuss is in this definition itself. First, it is also known under the name of the Aspirin Age, okay? It gives you a glimpse about aspirin, which means people back then or during that period used to party a lot, and they used to drink a lot of alcohol as well, so the next day they have headaches almost all the time. Therefore, they used to take aspirin, and this is why we call it Aspirin Age. Then we say it is a decade of a dramatic social and political and even economical change. So this says, or this tells you, that there is a change in the American society, there is a change in politics, and there is a change in economy. Anyways, we are going to see them, let's say in details, when we are going to go further within the video. Then we have the consumer-oriented economy, which means, and mass entertainment, of course, consumer-oriented economy, which means the American people consumed a lot of things, and they wanted to entertain themselves, especially going to movie theaters, parties, dancing, and everything. So all this is considered as entertainment. Now we move to the specific details about the Roaring Twenties. We start with changes. Everything is considered to be changes, by the way, and we start with economic prosperity. We had this economic prosperity as a result of the Great War. As you all know, the United States of America got out of the war victorious, and the loans that were given to the Allies were paid back, which gave the US economy a nice boost. As you all know, like I said in my previous videos, the video of the US entry into World War I, I said one of the main reasons why the United States of America entered the war is for economic interests, because many American businessmen decided to help the Allies in England or in France by giving them sums of money. So after the American intervention in the First World War, that kind of money was paid back to these Americans, which gave the American economy a great or a nice boost. This also gave USA the opportunity to initiate a system of loans to citizens, of course, to be able to invest and buy their personal needs. Since there was money, there was the availability of cash, the banks, or the US banks, decided to give loans to the citizens in order to make their lives easier and help them get whatever they wanted in their daily lives. Because it was the age of inventions as well, such as the radio, refrigerators, the automobile, which we're going to tackle later on as a point. So the banks decided to help them as well. Then we have another point which is very important. It is about employment. Full employment played a major role, which means everyone was able to find a job. Not only the whites, but the black people as well, and women, of course. So when you have this availability of jobs, okay, you have availability of time. Time, job, and money, okay, made life easier for the Americans. You see, they worked 8 hours a day and they had rest in the weekends, okay? They were free in the evenings, okay? And this is why they were able to party at night and go to the cinema, for example, or movie theater if you want. And when you have this, let's say, free time in the evenings, you can go party, drink alcohol, and this is why it is called aspirin age. So this is as far as the economic prosperity is concerned for today. Then we move to the next point, which is Republicans. For the Republicans, you should know that during the decade of the Roaring Twenties, 3 presidents of USA belonged to the Republican Party. In other words, the presidents who ruled or governed the United States of America during the Roaring Twenties belonged to the same party that we call Republican Party, okay? And these presidents are Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover, Warren Harding. So these 3 presidents belong to the Republican Party, and Republicans are famous for their capitalism and their laissez-faire policy, meaning the government will not interfere with the business. The government is there only to supervise. These Republicans also reduced taxes in order to incite people to invest, and they created a competition between businessmen. Because according to the ideology or the way of thinking of the Republicans, we should break state from economy and let people or businessmen decide what to do with their craft, for example, and the economy will flourish. This is according to Republicans, and this is what they have done, and with their capitalism and laissez-faire policy, and also they did not interfere with the business of the people. They reduced taxes also in order to incite people to invest even more, and they created this competition. And this is as far as Republicans is concerned. So the point of Republicans, of course. Then we have the automobile. When we talk about the automobile, we have the Ford Model T. Okay, it's a car which cost just $260 in 1924. Okay, it wasn't that expensive, and also the generous credits made by the bank made cars affordable almost to everyone. This is why roads were paved as well. Then we move to the point of women. When we talk about women, we should know the term flapper. Okay, a flapper is a young woman, bobbed hair, short skirts, rebellious most of the times, a woman who drinks and smokes, and it was the opposite of the Victorian woman. Another thing which is very important for women of that time is the fact that they could finally vote, and the 19th Amendment is all about that. But they didn't understand yet that the real emancipation was education. Which leads to the next point, which is movies. Movies were very important. They were played in the cinema, and Hollywood industry flourished during that period. I don't know if you know about movies such as Charlie Chaplin, a great series of movies, and that kind of movies flourished at that time, and there was no sound. Then you have another point, which is jazz age. When we talk about jazz age, people, especially the young, wanted to dance because they felt free and they loved parties. Like I said, they loved drinking, and some old people they objected jazz music because they thought it was vulgar. But the young did not care because they enjoyed the freedom on the dance floor and the parties and so on and so forth. This is as far as jazz age is concerned. Then we move to, before moving to the next point, you should know that all these points discussed above, they resulted in a period of mass consumption and mass production. When you have this kind of easy life, people are consuming a lot, either food, alcohol, or anything that is made by the nation. So even the factories are producing even more. Okay, they even had a saying which says that buy now, pay later. This is related to the loans. Okay, and also the more you consume, more there is a demand to produce. These are, let's say, notions of that period. And one thing that is outstanding, it's the fact that the income of an American was superior to many countries combined together. Okay. This is as far as the let's say the economic prosperity, Republicans, their impact on the American society, women in general, movies and jazz age, and also automobile. Now we move to something more serious, which is prohibition and bootleggers. Okay, you see the American society, when you give the any given society, by the way, this kind of freedom, this kind of easy life, the society becomes hedonistic. And by the way, this is what happened with the American society. The American society became hedonistic. Therefore, when we say hedonistic, it means they only sought the pleasures of life: drinking, partying, dancing, so consuming a lot. So generally, this leads to becoming lazy, okay, and easygoing. Then the government passed some laws which forbade the buying or selling of alcohol, or even manufacturing these goods or these alcohol drinks. Therefore, organized crime figures emerged as a power, like Al Capone, who controlled Chicago's police. Okay, this was very important, and he was selling these alcoholic drinks or liquors. So Al Capone lived in the United States of America. After the passing of the laws, he started selling his own, let's say, his own alcoholic drinks, which was against the law. So it increased violence and criminality. So this wasn't good for the American society. This is what we mean by bootleggers. Bootlegging is basically to do something against the law. In this context, it's Al Capone or other organized crime figures who were selling the alcoholic drinks to people because they couldn't, the American society couldn't stop drinking those liquors. Then we move to nativism. Nativism is another point, which means anyone who didn't belong to the WASP society or WASP community was considered as a foreigner. What do we mean by WASP? The WASP means or stands for White Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Okay? And as you all know, America, or the United States of America, is a country of diversity. So you have many communities there. You have Spanish, Italians, you have English, so many communities, okay? And some of them were Catholics. Some of them did not belong to the White Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Therefore, the Native Americans, when I say the Native Americans, it's not the Indians from the perspective of the US citizens, of course. The Native Americans are those who belong to the WASP. They developed this feeling at the same time when new parties emerged, such as Nazism, communism, fascism. Like I said, America is a country of diversity. If you go to Europe, after the end of the First World War, it was devastated, hunger, many bad consequences of the war. So in Europe, these parties emerged, such as Nazism in Germany, fascism in Italy, and communism in Russia after the success of the Bolshevik Revolution. So all these belong to specific communities. And some of the people of these communities lived in America, of course, after the immigration and all. So they belong to these movements, if you want. So the Native Americans, the WASP, developed this feeling against those people because they felt like they were foreigners. And this led to racism, of course. This racism was towards blacks, which also led to the revival of the KKK, and also racism towards Jews, Germans as Nazism, Russians. We had the Red Scare, which means to be against the movement of communism or the ideology of communism. You have Italians who were accused of bootlegging for the Italian mafia, so just like Al Capone, like I said before. This kind of negative feelings, this kind of racism were against many communities from the Native Americans, of course, who thought they belonged to the WASP community. So this is as far as nativism is concerned and racism. Now we move to the lost generation. What do we mean by a lost generation? It is a group of intellectuals like Ernest Hemingway or Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald, and they were against the dramatic change in the American society. According to these intellectuals, this dramatic change or this quick change or this rapid change was not good for the American society. There should be a specific, let's say, a specific speed to change from one state to another. But for the American society, it was going so fast. Therefore, these intellectuals wrote about this period, specifically in the United States of America, just like the Great Gatsby. T.S. Eliot wrote The Wasteland. So amazing works from them. And we have another point that we call the return to isolationism. So, the Americans did not want to enter World War I in the first place. When the war ended, they rejected the Treaty of Versailles, and then they wanted to keep out of foreign affairs, which means they did not want to deal with the European affairs anymore. So, because before the war, the United States of America took a policy of isolationism, or protectionism if you want. They were situated away from Europe, so they thought that whatever is happening in Europe is a European problem and not an American one. But eventually they voted, or they opted for the intervention of the US after Wilson's speech, of course. So after the end of the war, they regretted it somehow, and they rejected the Treaty of Versailles, and then they wanted to keep out from the foreign affairs or European affairs more precisely. And we move to another point that we call fundamentalism and the Scopes trial, which is, let's say, a point that is related to religion and Protestantism in America, and we are going to explain this as well. So the struggle between science and religion became very intensified during the Roaring Twenties. Why? You take the example of John Scopes, who was teaching Darwin's theory of evolution. And according to some Americans, because the American society was divided into two parts, those who thought that secularity is better, those who thought that we should keep the traditional values or the religious values, and those who were against secularity and science in general, they thought that this kind of teaching or teachings of evolution goes against what the Bible says, and it goes against the American values. And this matter reached the Supreme Court. This is what do we mean by the Scopes trial. And fundamentalism is basically a religious conservatism, and they wanted to keep the religion, and they did not want to break off from religion completely. Therefore, the American society got divided into two parts, and there was this tension between the two. Some who opted for secularity, others opted for religion. Then the last point to discuss is the Harlem Renaissance. It's an amazing point to read about. I advise you to read it on Digital History. It's a website. It gives more details, and it is about the flourishing of the African American culture in terms of literature, music, theatrical culture, because the African Americans had an amazing culture, and they still have this amazing culture. Especially they are the ones who created the blues and the jazz, which are considered to be as the African cries, especially after what happened to them during the slavery period in the United States of America. So I advise you to read something about it. And of course, this kind of flourishing or this kind of renaissance resulted in the blues and jazz music. Anyways, these are the points that I have decided to discuss with you concerning the Roaring Twenties. I personally think that they are enough, but it's a vast chapter that you can read about. I advise you to read the works of T.S. Eliot and Scott Fitzgerald, and you can read about Virginia Woolf. And if you have any question, feel free to ask me in the comments below, or message me on the Facebook page. Otherwise, I tell you, see you in the next video. Peace.